I'm happy to help expand this topic in an educational, survivor-focused way. Rather than providing explicit sexual content, here's a long-form expansion in a style inspired by Dr. RAMANI that focuses on the psychology of narcissistic abuse, manipulation, and healing. One of the most dangerous misconceptions about narcissistic relationships is that the greatest harm comes from the arguments, the insults, or the obvious manipulation. Those things are certainly painful, but many survivors will tell you that the deepest wounds often come from what happens in moments that should have felt safe. Intimacy in a healthy relationship is supposed to be one of the places where we feel most accepted, most understood, and most emotionally connected. It is where vulnerability becomes a bridge between two people rather than a weakness to exploit. A healthy partner understands that closeness is built through trust, empathy, communication, mutual respect, and genuine care. A narcissist often approaches intimacy from an entirely different perspective. Instead of asking, "How can we become closer?" the narcissistic mindset often asks, "How can I maintain control?" That difference changes everything. At the beginning of the relationship, this distinction is almost impossible to see. In fact, many survivors describe the early days as feeling magical. The narcissist may appear incredibly attentive, intensely affectionate, and unusually passionate. They may make you feel as though you are the only person who has ever truly understood them. Their attention feels intoxicating because it arrives with such intensity. They text constantly, compliment endlessly, and seem eager to spend every available moment with you. It feels like a fairy tale unfolding before your eyes. Many people mistake this intensity for emotional maturity or deep love because our culture often teaches us that overwhelming passion equals genuine connection. But intensity is not the same thing as intimacy. One is fast, dramatic, and consuming. The other is steady, respectful, and built over time. This early stage, often referred to as love bombing, serves an important psychological purpose. It creates an emotional benchmark that your brain begins chasing. The extraordinary attention convinces you that this is the real version of your partner. Later, when that warmth disappears, you naturally believe something must have gone wrong. Instead of questioning the narcissist's behavior, you begin questioning yourself. You wonder whether you became less interesting, less attractive, less supportive, or somehow less deserving of affection. This is exactly where the cycle begins to tighten. One of the defining characteristics of narcissistic relationships is that affection becomes conditional. Rather than being freely given as an expression of love, it becomes tied to compliance. When you admire them, agree with them, praise them, or put their needs first, they may suddenly become warm and affectionate again. When you disagree, establish a boundary, or express disappointment, that warmth often disappears. What was once freely offered now feels like something you must earn. Without realizing it, you begin adjusting your behavior to avoid emotional distance. You apologize more quickly, stay silent more often, and ignore your own needs because somewhere inside you hope that the loving person from the beginning will return. This creates what psychologists often describe as intermittent reinforcement. Rewards arrive unpredictably rather than consistently. Ironically, unpredictable rewards can create even stronger emotional attachment than consistent ones because the brain keeps anticipating the next moment of affection. You become emotionally invested not because the relationship is healthy, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to chase brief moments of connection after long periods of uncertainty. This cycle explains why many intelligent, capable, and emotionally aware people remain in relationships that outsiders find difficult to understand. It is not simply about love, it is about conditioning. Another important pattern involves the use of emotional withdrawal. Healthy couples experience disagreements, but they eventually repair the relationship through conversation, empathy, accountability, and understanding. Narcissists often use distance differently. Instead of resolving conflict, they create it and then withdraw emotionally as a form of punishment. Conversations become shorter, eye contact fades, warmth disappears. The atmosphere changes dramatically without explanation. You find yourself desperately trying to figure out what happened because the emotional shift feels so sudden and confusing. Over time, many survivors describe walking on eggshells. Every word is carefully chosen. Every disagreement feels risky. Every honest conversation carries the fear that affection will once again disappear. The relationship slowly transforms from a place of comfort into a place of emotional uncertainty. Rather than feeling safe enough to express yourself, you begin monitoring every action in hopes of preventing another episode of withdrawal or criticism. Another subtle but deeply damaging dynamic is that the narcissist often centers nearly every interaction around their own emotional needs. Your feelings become secondary. If you are hurt, somehow the conversation shifts back to how difficult your reaction has been for them. If you express loneliness, they may accuse you of being too demanding. If you ask for reassurance, they may tell you that your expectations are unrealistic. The focus consistently returns to protecting their ego instead of understanding your experience. This repeated dismissal teaches you an unhealthy lesson, that your emotional needs are burdens rather than legitimate parts of a loving relationship. Eventually, many survivors stop asking for support altogether because every attempt ends in disappointment, blame, or emotional exhaustion. They become quieter, smaller, and less connected to themselves. They begin believing that healthy relationships require constant self-sacrifice, when in reality, healthy relationships require mutual care. One of the greatest tragedies is that survivors often blame themselves. They spend months or even years trying to decode the narcissist's changing behavior. They read books, watch videos, attend counseling, improve their communication, and work tirelessly to become the perfect partner. They believe that if they can simply find the right words or become more patient, the relationship will return to what it once was. But the early version of the relationship was never meant to last. It served as the hook that created emotional investment. Once that investment existed, control became more important than connection. This realization can feel heartbreaking, but it is also incredibly liberating. It means you can stop carrying responsibility for fixing a dynamic you did not create. It means you can stop measuring your worth by another person's inability to offer empathy, accountability, or consistency. It means recognizing that genuine intimacy cannot exist where fear, manipulation, and power dominate the relationship. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: healthy love never requires you to abandon yourself. It never asks you to silence your voice in exchange for affection. It never teaches you that respect must be earned through perfection. A healthy partner celebrates your individuality rather than seeing it as a threat. They encourage honesty instead of punishing it. They repair conflict rather than weaponizing it. They understand that vulnerability is something to protect, not something to exploit. As you begin healing, your definition of intimacy changes. You stop confusing intensity with love. You stop believing that unpredictability is passion. You stop interpreting emotional highs and lows as proof of a powerful connection. Instead, you begin valuing consistency, emotional safety, kindness, accountability, and mutual respect. These qualities may not create the dramatic highs of a narcissistic relationship, but they create something far more valuable: peace. Remember this above all else. Love should never leave you constantly questioning your value. It should never make you afraid to express your needs. It should never force you to choose between your dignity and your relationship. Real intimacy allows you to feel seen without fear, heard without punishment, and loved without conditions. The moment you understand that truth, you begin reclaiming the parts of yourself that manipulation tried to erase. And that journey back to yourself is one of the most courageous acts you will ever undertake. I'd be happy to help with that. I'll keep it in an educational, survivor-focused style, inspired by Dr. RAMANI, emphasizing psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, and recovery rather than explicit sexual content. If control is the currency of narcissism, then shame is one of its most powerful tools. While many people imagine manipulation as loud arguments or obvious intimidation, narcissistic manipulation is often much quieter. It slips into everyday conversations, subtle criticisms, sarcastic comments, shifting expectations, and moments that leave you questioning yourself long after the conversation has ended. The goal is rarely just to win an argument. The goal is to reshape your perception of yourself so that you become easier to control. Healthy relationships build confidence. They create an environment where both partners feel accepted, respected, and emotionally safe. Even when disagreements occur, there is room for accountability, repair, and mutual understanding. A narcissistic relationship often moves in the opposite direction. Instead of strengthening your confidence, it slowly erodes it. This erosion rarely happens overnight. If it did, most people would recognize the danger and leave. Instead, it happens so gradually that you hardly notice the changes until your self-esteem has been significantly diminished. In the beginning, the narcissist may praise everything about you. They tell you that you are extraordinary, intelligent, attractive, compassionate, or unlike anyone they have ever met. Their admiration feels genuine, and naturally you begin trusting their opinion. But because they helped build your confidence, they also place themselves in a position where they can later dismantle it. This is one of the most confusing aspects of narcissistic abuse. The same person who once made you feel incredible slowly becomes the person who makes you question everything about yourself. The criticism often begins subtly. It may come disguised as humor. They might laugh after making a hurtful remark and tell you that you are too sensitive. They may compare you to other people in ways that make you feel inadequate while insisting they are only trying to help you improve. They may point out flaws that you never considered before, planting seeds of insecurity where confidence once existed. Because these comments are scattered among occasional compliments, you convince yourself they do not really mean any harm. You focus on the good moments and minimize the painful ones. Over time, however, those small comments accumulate. Your inner voice slowly changes. You begin noticing flaws you never paid attention to before. You become increasingly cautious about expressing yourself because you anticipate criticism. You replay conversations in your mind, wondering whether you said the wrong thing or reacted incorrectly. Little by little, your confidence no longer comes from within. It becomes dependent upon whether the narcissist approves of you on any given day. This emotional dependency is exactly what the narcissist wants. A confident person with strong boundaries is much more difficult to manipulate. Someone who constantly doubts themselves is far easier to influence. When your self-worth depends on another person's approval, you naturally work harder to maintain that approval. You become more willing to overlook disrespect, excuse harmful behavior, and silence your own needs in order to preserve the relationship. Another powerful weapon narcissists use is comparison. Instead of appreciating you as an individual, they constantly measure you against someone else. Perhaps they mention an ex-partner who supposedly handled situations better. Maybe they praise a coworker, a sibling, or even a stranger in ways that subtly imply you are falling short. These comparisons are rarely meant to inspire growth. They are designed to create insecurity. Once insecurity takes hold, you become increasingly motivated to prove yourself. The tragedy is that the standard is always moving. No matter how much you improve, it is never enough because the goal was never your growth. The goal was maintaining your uncertainty. You begin running a race with no finish line, believing that if you just become slightly better, the relationship will finally feel secure again. But security never arrives because instability is what keeps the narcissist in control. Gaslighting is another devastating component of this manipulation. Gaslighting occurs when someone repeatedly causes you to question your own perception of reality. Imagine bringing up something that clearly hurt you only to hear, "That never happened. You're imagining things," or "You're remembering it wrong." Perhaps they insist that you misunderstood their words despite your clear memory of the conversation. Maybe they accuse you of being dramatic every time you express legitimate emotions. After enough repetition, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop trusting yourself. You start wondering whether your memory is accurate. You question your instincts. You seek the narcissist's interpretation of events because your own judgment no longer feels reliable. This confusion is not accidental. It creates dependency. Once someone no longer believes their own perceptions, they naturally rely more heavily on the person creating the confusion. That dependency strengthens the narcissist's influence even further. One of the most painful experiences for survivors is realizing how much energy they spent trying to explain their feelings. They rehearsed conversations in advance, carefully choosing words that could not possibly be misunderstood. They gathered examples, evidence, and proof, hoping that this time the narcissist would finally understand. Yet the conversation almost always ended the same way. Somehow the focus shifted away from the original issue and onto the survivor's reaction. Instead of discussing the hurtful behavior, the narcissist criticizes the way the survivor expressed their feelings. This creates emotional exhaustion. Eventually, many people stop speaking up altogether because every attempt leads to confusion, blame, or endless circular conversations. Silence begins to feel easier than conflict. Unfortunately, that silence also allows manipulation to continue unchecked. Another hallmark of narcissistic manipulation is the double standard. Rules apply differently depending on who is involved. The narcissist expects endless patience for their own mistakes while offering very little grace for yours. They demand understanding when they are stressed, but dismiss your struggles as excuses. They expect honesty from you while becoming defensive whenever you ask reasonable questions. They insist on loyalty while feeling entitled to violate your trust. This imbalance creates a relationship where one person's needs consistently outweigh the others. Healthy relationships are built upon reciprocity. Both people apologize. Both people compromise. Both people accept responsibility when they make mistakes. In narcissistic relationships, accountability is often replaced with blame. If something goes wrong, responsibility somehow lands on your shoulders. Even when the facts clearly suggest otherwise, the narcissist finds a way to redirect attention away from their behavior and toward your response. Over time, you become accustomed to carrying emotional burdens that never belong to you. One of the most liberating moments in recovery occurs when survivors recognize that chronic confusion is not normal. Healthy relationships may include occasional misunderstandings, but they do not leave you feeling perpetually anxious about your own reality. They do not make you question your memory after every disagreement. They do not require you to justify every emotion or defend every boundary. Emotional clarity is a hallmark of psychological safety. As healing begins, many survivors notice something remarkable. The constant mental noise slowly quiets. They stop replaying every conversation in search of hidden mistakes. They begin trusting their intuition again. They realize that the uneasy feeling they carried for so long was not evidence that they were overly sensitive. It was evidence that something in the relationship was fundamentally unhealthy. The greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to believe your own experience. If someone's words consistently leave you feeling ashamed, confused, diminished, or emotionally unsafe, those feelings deserve your attention. You do not need another person's permission to recognize manipulation. You do not need overwhelming evidence to justify healthy boundaries. Your emotional well-being matters. Your perspective matters. Your reality matters. Recovery does not happen because the narcissist suddenly changes. Recovery begins when you stop allowing their version of reality to replace your own. It begins when you understand that respect is not earned through perfection, but experienced through mutual care. It begins when you recognize that love should expand your confidence rather than shrink it. And once you reclaim your ability to trust yourself again, you take back the very power that manipulation was designed to steal. I'd be happy to expand the third keynote in the same educational, empowering style inspired by Dr. RAMANI, focusing on recovery, boundaries, and rebuilding after narcissistic abuse. Perhaps the greatest misconception about healing from a narcissistic relationship is that it begins the day you leave. In reality, healing often begins much earlier, in the quiet moments when something inside you starts whispering that this cannot be what love is supposed to feel like. It begins when you notice that you are constantly anxious instead of secure, exhausted instead of supported, confused instead of understood. It begins when you realize that you have spent more time trying to earn someone's approval than simply enjoying their companionship. That realization is not weakness. It is the beginning of awakening. One of the hardest truths survivors must face is that they cannot love another person into becoming emotionally healthy. This realization can be devastating because many people stay in narcissistic relationships, believing that if they are patient enough, forgiving enough, understanding enough, or selfless enough, things will eventually change. They convince themselves that the narcissist is simply wounded, misunderstood, or going through a difficult season. While compassion is a beautiful quality, compassion without boundaries often becomes self-abandonment. Many survivors are incredibly empathetic people. They naturally look for the good in others. They explain away hurtful behavior because they understand that everyone has struggles. They tell themselves, maybe they're just stressed, maybe they didn't mean it, or maybe if I communicate more clearly, they'll finally understand. Over time, however, this empathy becomes one-sided. You continue extending grace while receiving very little in return. You continue giving the benefit of the doubt while your own pain goes unseen. Eventually, you begin sacrificing your emotional well-being in an attempt to preserve the relationship. This is one of the most important turning points in recovery. Recognizing the difference between helping someone and rescuing someone. Healthy relationships involve mutual support. Both partners are willing to learn, apologize, grow, and make changes. In narcissistic relationships, the responsibility for growth often falls almost entirely on one person. You become the peacemaker, the problem solver, the emotional caretaker, and the one who keeps trying to repair a relationship that the other person continually damages. That is not partnership. That is emotional imbalance. As survivors begin to step away from this dynamic, they often experience something that surprises them: guilt. Even after enduring manipulation, criticism, and emotional exhaustion, they may feel guilty for establishing boundaries. They wonder if they are being selfish. They question whether they are giving up too soon. They worry about what other people will think. This guilt is understandable because narcissistic relationships frequently condition people to believe that prioritizing themselves is somehow wrong. But boundaries are not acts of punishment. They are acts of protection. A boundary is not about controlling another person's behavior. It is about deciding what you will and will not accept in your own life. Healthy people respect boundaries because they understand that mutual respect strengthens relationships. Narcissistic individuals often resist boundaries because boundaries limit their access to control. When someone becomes angry simply because you have asked to be treated with respect, that reaction reveals far more about them than it does about you. One of the most powerful changes that occurs during healing is learning to trust your own instincts again. Narcissistic manipulation often leaves people doubting their perceptions. They second-guess every feeling, every memory, and every decision. They ask friends for reassurance before making simple choices because they no longer trust themselves. This loss of self-trust is one of the deepest wounds narcissistic abuse creates. Rebuilding that trust takes time. It begins with small decisions. You honor your feelings instead of dismissing them. You stop explaining away behavior that consistently hurts you. You allow yourself to believe what you observe instead of accepting someone else's version of reality. Slowly, confidence begins to return. You discover that your intuition was never broken. It was simply buried beneath months or years of manipulation and self-doubt. Another important step in healing is redefining what love actually looks like. Many survivors mistake emotional intensity for emotional intimacy because the narcissistic relationship was filled with dramatic highs and painful lows. The reconciliation after conflict felt exhilarating, not because the relationship was healthy, but because the emotional roller coaster created powerful psychological relief. When life becomes calmer after leaving, some survivors mistakenly interpret that peace as boredom. In reality, peace is not the absence of love. It is often evidence of emotional safety. Healthy love does not require a constant crisis. It does not depend upon keeping someone guessing about where they stand. It does not swing wildly between idealization and rejection. Instead, healthy love is remarkably consistent. It is found in reliability, honesty, accountability, kindness, and mutual respect. It allows both people to grow without fear of punishment for expressing their thoughts or emotions. As healing progresses, many survivors notice that their standards begin to change. They stop being impressed by grand promises and dramatic declarations. Instead, they begin paying attention to consistency. Does this person keep their word? Do they respect my boundaries? Can we disagree without fear? Do I feel emotionally safe expressing my needs? These questions become far more important than charm or charisma because survivors have learned that genuine character is revealed through consistent behavior over time. Healing also involves grieving not only the relationship, but the future you imagined. Many people mourn the dreams they had, the family they hoped to build, or the life they believed was possible. This grief is real and it deserves compassion. You are not simply letting go of a person. You are letting go of expectations, hopes, and plans that mattered deeply to you. Allowing yourself to grieve is not a sign that you made the wrong decision. It is evidence that your heart genuinely cared. As time passes, something extraordinary begins to happen. The energy that was once consumed by managing another person's emotions becomes available for your own life. You reconnect with friends you neglected. You rediscover hobbies that once brought you joy. You pursue goals that had been placed on hold. You laugh more easily. You sleep more peacefully. You begin recognizing the person you were before manipulation convinced you that you were never enough. Perhaps the greatest transformation of all is that you stop seeking validation from the very person who withheld it. This shift is profound because it changes the source of your self-worth. Instead of asking, "How do they see me?" you begin asking, "How do I see myself?" Instead of measuring your value by another person's approval, you begin measuring it by your integrity, your compassion, your resilience, and your growth. That is true freedom. One lesson Dr. RAMANI consistently emphasizes is that closure does not always come from the narcissist. Many survivors spend years waiting for an apology that never arrives, or for an acknowledgement of the harm that was done. But healing does not require another person's confession. Healing comes from accepting reality as it is, rather than waiting for someone else to validate your experience. The moment you stop expecting accountability from someone who consistently refuses to take responsibility, you reclaim enormous emotional power. Recovery is not about becoming bitter or cynical. It is about becoming wiser. It is about recognizing red flags without losing your capacity to love. It is about developing boundaries without building walls around your heart. It is about learning that vulnerability is a strength when it is shared with emotionally healthy people. Most importantly, it is about understanding that your worth has never depended on another person's ability to recognize it. If you take only one message from this journey, let it be this: you are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not demanding for expecting honesty. You are not weak because manipulation affected you. Narcissistic abuse is designed to create confusion, dependency, and self-doubt. The fact that you are learning, growing, and choosing a healthier future is evidence of remarkable courage. The greatest victory over narcissistic manipulation is not revenge. It is not proving them wrong. It is not waiting for them to realize what they lost. The greatest victory is reclaiming your peace. It is waking up without fear. It is speaking without apologizing for your existence. It is trusting your own judgment. It is building relationships where kindness is normal, respect is mutual, and love is never used as a weapon. When you reach that place, you discover something beautiful. The life you were trying so desperately to save was never the relationship. The life worth saving was always your own.